Well, today you'll kind of have to forgive in some way many things about me, but one thing is my voice. My voice may sound a little deeper than usual or a little in a tunnel, and it's because I kind of caught a cold. Or it caught me. I always say, I was running, but it caught me, but today we're going to look at Hebrews chapter 5. In Hebrews chapter 5, I titled it The Perfect Match. Now, I know at least one person looking at the title slide that I have here is bothered by it, and it's my wife. And I intentionally did that. I mean, part of it is, I think we're the perfect match. We've been married 31 years, and I think about that and I go, well, we're the perfect match because we're so dissimilar in some ways, but we found ways to enjoy and even celebrate and at times ridicule those differences. But one of the things that my family knows for sure is that I actually have been getting some comments that I'm doing a better job matching, right? And whatever that means. And so I am. I'm actually trying to do a more conscientious job of having what I wear actually go together with other things I wear. But my family also knows that one of the things I love to do is just to go out in our neighborhood and not care. And one of the things that I do is I have like these really obnoxious pajama pants, and then I'll throw on a polka dotted shirt and then my orange Crocs to just really top it off, and maybe a dorky hat to keep the sun off while I'm doing outside work or something. And the neighbors would walk by and think, oh, well, there's Scott. I'm not sure exactly what Lynn saw in him, but there it is, And at the same time, again, when you think about that, one of the long-term things that they say is that you can't mix stripes and plaids, right? I mean, you're just not supposed to do that. Or, if you think through some of the things in life, people say they simply don't go together. Right now there's a very popular program on one of the streaming services that says, Is Love Blind? It's kind of the theme of it, and people are cringe watching it, binge watching it, whatever it might be. And I will admit to that guilty pleasure that I did partake of that. But without any spoilers, I'm just letting you know that part of the premise of that show is they get people to actually talk and get to know each other before they see each other. And they actually are going to either propose or not propose marriage to that person before they've ever laid eyes on them. And then they have the big reveal on the way to their wedding date, which is very accelerated. And the question is real life going to clash with this perception that they had of that person prior to even getting to see them in real life? And so when I think about that, you go like, those shows, I think, are interesting to people because people are looking for the perfect match. I mean, what is it that, I find that special friendship or that special relationship or that thing where we're just soulmates, And when I think about what that is, I have some very interesting friendships that people even kind of scratch their head on what is it that makes you guys such great friends. And I'll talk a tiny bit about that because it was relevant to this last week. But when you think about the perfect match, there has never been a more odd couple ever than me and God. Talk about a strange match. I mean, really, he's, let's see, perfect. I'm not so much, right? He's timeless and all-powerful. And I'm like pretty powerless and frail and messed up, really. I have issues, right? God doesn't really have any issues. I have a lot of things that need to change. God doesn't ever change and doesn't need to. So when you think about that, you say, yeah, you know what, Scott? You are an odd couple, you and God. But guess what? So are you. When you really think through it, you might think, yeah, me and God, we got something going on. You go, why? How? How in the world is that working out? How does that work? How do you find the perfect match with your maker? When you think about a matchmaker, but you think about matching with the creator and the creation and having God say, I just love you, Scott. And you go, well, I love you too, but we're kind of different. And God's word even makes very clear, we're kind of different. And so when I think about that, I think as different as plaids and stripes might be, I can tell you that I'm pretty different than Jesus. And yet Jesus somehow bridges a gap with grace that is so huge that that's what the book of Hebrews is all about. I mean, when I really come down to this thought, I remember coaches telling me practice makes perfect. But guess what? I practiced a lot and I stayed extremely imperfect. In fact, I was such a bad practicer that I would practice bad free throws because I was so bad at them. I just got better and better at getting worse and worse. You know what I mean? I mean, my technique was so off that the more I did it, the worse I got, it seemed. And so I think about some things like that, and practice doesn't make perfect. The Bible actually makes it clear that no amount of practice is going to make you perfect and fit for heaven. See, they talk about a match made in heaven, a match made for heaven. And you go, man, I would love to be a person fit for that perfect place, but frankly, I don't know that it's a fit. See, I give tours of our school all the time, and that's what I'm always talking to parents about is a fit. Hey, I think this could be the perfect fit because we're the imperfect school. You have an imperfect child, and it's going to go great together if we both will do that. But what if we were the perfect place and people say like, if you find the perfect church, don't join it because you'll ruin it, right? I mean, if you find the perfect city, don't move there because you'll ruin it. I mean, there's a point where if I move to heaven, it's like, well, it was pretty good until Scott got here. There went the neighborhood, right? And so you ask those questions and you say, what is it that God sees in us? And so I think about this, the perfect match. Well, one thing that I love, and this is just a simple thought for you to think through, but I hope you will. God is perfect, but God is not a perfectionist. Have you ever been around a perfectionist? It's a person who you can never be good enough for. Nothing can ever be good enough for them. In fact, they like everything perfect, and if something imperfect comes in, they want it out. They've got to get rid of it. And I've thought about this many times that it's hard to please people, and it's especially hard to please a perfectionist person, right? Where 100 isn't enough, right? Why didn't you get the extra credit? Well, I did get the extra credit. That's how I got the 100. I missed one. Oh, which one did you miss? And before you know it, you're like, well, I just never can live up. I can never live because I can never live up. But God is not like that. Though He is perfect, He's not a perfectionist. In fact, the Bible repeatedly reminds us that He knows how imperfect we are. He knew how imperfect we'd be. And from the beginning of time, He said, I'm going to love them anyway. I'm going to love them in such a way that they're going to see that we're the perfect match. Because my perfection and their imperfection, I've got a cover up that's going to change everything. And you go, a cover up? Well, yeah, let's get to it. Let's get into it in just a moment. We'll start looking at it verse by verse. But what you've got to think about here is entering the idea into God's picture of the priest and the perfect substitute. What is that? Well, that's the idea all throughout the Old Testament, and Hebrews is directly connected to that. It's the idea that if there's a gap between God and mankind, and there is, if there's the superhuman and just the human, no matter how super, you go like, there's a gap there. What are we going to do about that? God is holy, we're unholy. What are we going to do about that? God is perfect, we're imperfect. What's the perfect solution for that? Well, some would say what religion is all of us trying to be good enough to get to God, right? It's building ourselves up, improving ourselves, cleaning ourselves up, making enough appropriate choices that God says, you know what? I'm starting to like you. I like the way you look. I like the way you talk. I like the way you act. You're good enough for God now. I'll let you in. I'm still having to round down, but I'll let you in. Well, that is the religious systems of the world, including ones that masquerade as Christianity or Judaism or whatever that might be more familiar and acceptable. But at the end of the day, if it's a religious system, it's us working our way to God. through doing enough good deeds or doing few enough bad deeds or whatever else, right? And then there's this thing that the Bible talks about from the beginning and all the way through to the end, which is the idea of grace, which is that God covers the gap. That God reached out to us, that God came from heaven to earth and bridged the gap and filled that with grace and filled our heart enough with grace that we go like, you mean I'm not good enough for God and I never will be? No amount of practice will make me perfect. But God has perfected me and made me perfect and fit for heaven. And you go, yeah, that's what he did. He tailor-made something so that it fits me and covers up all of the flaws that I have. So I'm flawed and he's God, but that's a perfect match. And he says, yeah, that's it. That's the perfect match. See, and I think about this little thought. Again, it's so wonderful to see people tuning in. I can actually do that and see that. And I look down that list and y'all perfect people, because you're imperfect people. You know, you're perfect to be watching. That's why you like and put up with me. And that's why I like and put up with you, because we're in the boat together, right? Of saying like, hey, we understand there's a gap that God had to fill. And you know, that if I could boil down a lifetime of Bible learning, which has led to some Bible teaching that I do, but a lot of Bible learning that I've done, it's this, that the gospel is the thing that says the good news that God is big enough to fill the gap between the two biggest gaps in the entirety of the universe, which is the gap between me and God. We are an odd couple, and we're going to be happily ever after, right? And me and the person next to me. However much I may think I'm like them, or I think they like me, you know, let's just spend a weekend together and go on a trip together and go like, what do you want for dinner? Well, I don't like that. We had that last time. Oh, well, okay. I had it last time because I liked it. Before you know it, you're like, blah, and you're like, I can't stand this person. They're so different than I am. And you're like, but I thought you were friends. Yeah, we're like soulmates. We're roommates. Gosh, I can't stand each other. I got to go find a new relationship, you know, and you go like, okay, well, maybe. But the problem is, here's something I found. I'm in every relationship I'm in. That's one of the problems with them, right? I'm in every friendship I'm in. And even if I'm just with myself, there's times where I don't even agree with myself. And I'm like, you know what I said yesterday to myself? I don't agree with that at all. And so, again, if you think about the idea of the priest and the perfect substitute, you thought I forgot, but I didn't. It's this idea that this gap is being filled by somebody. There's like a mediator. There's a mediator that says, y'all can't seem to get along. Let me see if I can work it out between the two of you. You've been in realtor situations or whatever else where there's two people who just two parties who can't seem to see eye to eye, and in comes the negotiator, right? And the negotiator says, I'll talk to them. I'll talk to you. We'll work it all out. We'll drop a little agreement and everything will be fine. You guys will get along great and this will all work out. See, but I think about that again in the Old Testament. This is God's, prescription for it. It was kind of like, here's what I'll do. I'll take a really godly guy and I'll put him between the ungodly people and God. Okay, there'll be a go-between. Okay, there'll be this guy Aaron was the family, the Levites. I mean, again, I'm just kind of filling in some of the gaps that some might have on this stuff that you go like, there was a priestly family. In this priest family, the idea was that they would be so plugged into the things of God that they would plug into God, plug into people, and bring them together. Right? They would just kind of bridge that gap because there's a big gap between the folks that just out living their life, and then there's people who are maybe living their whole life thinking toward God. They're still not God, but they're at least godly, God toward, and they try to bridge that gap. And that part of what they would do is there would be a sacrifice for sin, because if sin leads to death, then God's like, well, we could kill you, or we could kill a substitute, right? And you go like, oh gosh, is that really the options? It's like, yeah, sin leads to death, and I need you to deeply understand the reality of that. That is built into the process. Something dies, someone dies for sin. And when you think about sin, relationships die because of sin, don't they? Friendships die because of sin. A lot of things die because of sin, both metaphorically and practically in reality. And so when you look at this, sin is separation. That's what it is. And that's what he's saying is something has to cover over that. And so it was either my death or the death of a substitute. And all throughout the Old Testament, that was a truth that was so ingrained in people that they began to even take it for granted. They're just like, I'm kind of messing up my life, but there's a scapegoat for that, And here's what bothers me about that is I think about it right now. Like, what if you had to come to church and you brought with you an innocent animal that would die in your stead? You would kind of go like, that's messed up. In fact, a lot of people find fault with the Bible system because they're like, I don't like that. I think that's archaic and just, borders on pagan. It's just nasty. It's just terrible. I mean, why should an innocent lamb die for my mistake? And you go, well, I don't know. Innocence dies all the time because of people's errors. But when I think about that, it would be a very severe thing. But here's what's funny about it. It would tend to punish the wrong person, right? Because if somebody's super sensitive, I mean, again, I just think of my own wife and how she is. She can't stand when an insect is harmed at our house. I mean, I don't think you understand how many times cups have gone out the door, and let two more in while one was going out just simply because, it's just an innocent little stink bug. And I'm like, no. So one of our differences is I'm kind of like, I'm less sensitive that way. But I admire the fact that she has such a heart sensitivity to all living things that I've seen her apologize to trees and apologize to a plant for, I'm sorry, I stepped on your leaf, and I'm like, leave it alone. It doesn't matter. But those are differences, right? But when I think about that, people who were sensitive to sin would have also been sensitive to the substitute and everything else. And you know what else they'd be sensitive to? The hypocrisy of the priesthood. Because this is what Hebrews talks about, the fact that the priests were imperfect themselves, the earthly priests. So here, the big theme of Hebrews, if you've lost the thread on it, just know this. The thread going through it is that Jesus the priest, Jesus the substitute and the sacrifice is better than the whole of the Old Testament religious system. That he was the point of it, and the replacement of it. Don't ever go back to the thing that simply pointed a picture forward to a person who would be the perfect match for you. And to go back to the idea of saying, well, no, we'll just go back to a earthly priest and confess to them, and we will look to them as the go-between us and God, and we'll set up some gift or sacrifice if I give enough, or if I do enough this and I do enough that, then that will be enough to satisfy God. And you go, that's moving backwards. Don't move backwards. You found the perfect match and the perfect priest in Jesus. And so that's where we find ourselves as we go on now to verse 1. So this is verse 1 and the first 3 verses really of Hebrews chapter 5. So it's talking about the high priest. It's talking about that person who would represent God to the people, represent the people to God. They were the bridge between earth and heaven, right? I mean, that's what it was. But again, they were just people, but they were a people picked by God to represent a role, okay, for a time. And this is what it says. Every high priest is selected from among the people and is appointed to represent the people in matters related to God, to offer gifts and sacrifice for sin. Okay, so you can see very clearly there, I didn't make up what I was just talking about. There's this system of sacrifice and substitution and a priesthood and all this. And a person was picked from among the people for that, elected for that. And it says he's able to deal gently. Well, that's good. With those who are ignorant. Well, that's me. And going astray. Well, that's us. Since he himself is subject to weakness. So it's saying he's good. He's good for the role because he's messed up. He's messed up too. And I stop right there for just a minute. Have you ever noticed how they call them dental practices or medical practices? And I always think, can you practice before you start on me? Because I don't want you to practice on me, right? If practice makes at least progress, I would like you to progress, medically or dentally before I open my mouth or I open my chest to your work. But you get the point of what you're saying. What if you went to a doctor who had never felt pain? Do you want to go to that doctor? What if you were cared for by a nurse who had no compassion? I mean, a lot of knowledge, but no compassion whatsoever. What if you went to a dental person and that lady was an amazing driller? I mean, she could drill, but she did not care one thing about you. You go like, wait, I don't like this, right? So this is what you say. You're saying a good patient is a person who's had to be patient, right? A doctor who has felt pain is hopefully a little more appreciative of what it is when you're feeling that pain. And I like that concept. That's what he's talking about here. He's saying that high priest that was picked from among the Levites and everything else, well, there's one good thing going for him, which is they didn't have every good thing going for them. I mean, they were just a person, just like you. And so they were able to help people who were ignorant and weak. But the problem was they were ignorant and weak. And this is why he has to offer sacrifice for his own sin as well as for the sins of the people. Now, again, I hope you understand as you look at just those 3 verses, I know this is dense material. But guess what? Sometimes this is dense material. And what I mean by that, the dense material of my heart, it's even going to talk about it in this, is it says, if we don't understand this, we don't understand God. And I think about how many people spend so little time understanding their own friends and family and relationships. And you go like, what else would you spend your time trying to understand? What would I want to know better than to know better the people that are around me? And so when I think about God's relationship with me and my relationship with him, it's worth investing a little bit of time and effort in. And that's the whole point here is he's saying, the priest, the high priest in the Old Testament system had to offer for his own sin first because he said, I am a sinner. And then he offered for the people. So that's how that process went. It was priest first, and then the priest would be cleansed, and then he would go out and clean and forgive the people. But he first had to be forgiven because he was imperfect. And see, this is what I think about it. That's a good thing that he had the sympathy and the empathy maybe of making mistakes. But the problem is he made mistakes. And over time, the high priest, if you look at this, I like sometimes to throw out some tips for our little trivia things almost that people go like, I never knew that. Well, have you ever noticed in the Old Testament, there was a high priest? In the New Testament, when Jesus was being condemned to death, it was by the high priests. And you go, why is that? Why did it get plural? I'll tell you why it got plural. It was a popularity contest. It was a bidding contest. It had so corrupted over time that something God put in one way, people brought it in a different way, and it became highest bidder. And so instead of having it go to the one highest bidder, what they did is they just said, I'll tell you what, both of y'all can do it as long as both of y'all pay. And so there was Ananias and Caiaphas, and they were the high priests, but they had paid for the position. And so when you think about that, they were horrible hypocrites. And so God got the blame for what really wasn't got the blame for all that. He didn't, that wasn't his idea. His idea was actually far different than that. But the implementation over time had grown messed up. And so this is what I wrote down, and I think it's interesting. The very thing that was good about a human example is the very thing that was bad about a human example. See, I think about it in my own life. The great thing about being a role model is you're a role model, but what if you're a bad role model? See, I have hopefully had tremendous influence on people and been tremendously influenced by people. But if I look up to somebody on earth and then they let me down, man, that's a terrible thing. So you go like, gosh, I'm so disillusioned. The very thing that they had the capacity to make me go, I finally met somebody who's so wonderful. And then you find out, no, they're just as messed up as you are. And I think about this, human priests are no better than us, and they may be worse. See, I think sometimes religious systems can so produce problems that the very person that someone looks to for, oh, this is my pastor, this is my guru, this is my example, this is my, leader and all that. And they go, I've seen some really, really bad situations there where someone didn't even realize how abusive a relationship this was because of the power differential. And you go like, that's the problem. Where's God going to find somebody on earth looking around that he says, I really love Scott and I'd like to match him with a really, really great example. The problem is I can't find one, right? I mean, the Bible says that his eyes go to and fro across the earth looking for somebody who he could say, is there someone can I use this person as an example? And they will stay humble enough that even if they are an example, they're an example of even how to make mistakes in a human and godly way where you go like, yeah, I messed up. I'm a mess up. There's no cover up here. I, like you, have frailties. I, like you, have difficulties. And I've thought about it many times. And we have our middle child, oldest daughter here, Bethany, in the room. And I think about that. And I think my kids would say that their dad was so far from perfect. Their mom was so far from perfect, but not as far as their dad. But we're a good match because both of us let the kids know, hey, the things that I'm not, she is. The things she's not, I am. But together we're better. And guess what? When we mess up, we fess up. There have been times where I've had to apologize to each of my kids. Hey, that was not dad at its best. That was not dad as he should have been. But that's the very reason I never said, look to me as the answer. Look to me for the questions and look to God for the answers that God has provided for our family, right? So when I think about that again, the problem with any human is they're like us, so they can relate to us, but that's the problem. They're like us. So going on, this is what it says in verse 4, right? I think this is so cool. It says, no one takes this honor on himself. At least that's how the system was supposed to be. He receives it when called by God, just as Aaron was. He's, again, contrasting the Old Testament thing. In the same way, he's saying, now Jesus didn't say, I'll do it, and just decide up in heaven one day, I will be the savior of the world, right? This was something that was, there's a mystery here because there's a triunity to God, but there's a unity to God. And when you look at that, you see that Jesus, God as a man here on earth, Christ didn't take it on himself, the glory of becoming high priest and say, I'll do it. It was God the Father saying, you'll do it. And him saying, of course I'll do it. Because I would do it for the love that we have for humanity. Because we know they ain't fit for heaven. But here's what's funny. This is what I love about it. Again, God isn't a perfectionist. What do I mean by that? He could have made heaven and said, there, perfect. Now, none of y'all mess it up. You ever been to a place where it's like, this room is off limits? And God says, I go and prepare a place for you that you may be with me also. He's like, it isn't perfect without you. I mean, you think about that and you go like, you mean heaven's incomplete in God's mind without me? Yeah. See, I've been some places where the main thing I was thinking is, I'm like, this is so great. Except where's Lynn? Seriously, I've had that moment. I've like, this would be greater still if so-and-so was here. And that's what you see God's heart as a perfect, but not a perfectionist. He's like, I'm preparing a place, but what makes it perfect to me is you'll be there. And so I think about this and he says, God says to him, you're my son. I've become your father. And he says in another place, you're a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Now, we're not even going to scratch the surface of Melchizedek today, so forget that. And you're like, I don't even know who he is. Well, you will when we get to Hebrews 7. He's extremely important to this story. And let's just say this. Melchizedek is a mystery man in the Old Testament who predates the Levite priesthood. And it's very important that something came before it, because now he's going to mirror image it and say, and something came after it. Because they were saying, well, the Levitical priesthood, man, I grew up with a priest. My parents tell me I got to confess to the priest. I got to go to the priest. The priest does the substitute, and you're telling me I'm going to just suddenly throw out my entire belief system? And he says, yes, you are, because that entire belief system was pointing to the perfection of a person, and there was something that came before it. There's it, and there's someone that comes after it, and he's in the order of Melchizedek. So I'm just giving you that as a preview. That's what that's all about. But this is the thought, again, the big thought for today. You and Jesus are a perfect match, made in heaven, but it's because you're made by heaven. And there's a cover-up. The right kind of cover-up. We're not just a match made in heaven. We're a match made by heaven for heaven. And Jesus had to come to earth to do that. He had to come and be a part of our mess. You know, I often say the Messiah came to the mess, right? The messenger came to the mess. Because this is what it says. It's going to explain why he came and why he came the way he came. Notice this. It says, verse 7 in chapter 5 of Hebrews, during the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers. That's something the priest did. Petitions, you know, begging with heaven, fervent cries, tears to the one who could save him from death. So, first of all, he was going through probably the most difficult of all human processes, which is death. He was going to taste death, it says. And he's like, saving from death. Well, it didn't prevent him from the suffering, did it? That's not the saving from death. It was being saved through death. It was that death wasn't permanent, and that the after death was that perfection again. But remember, he had it before he came here. Jesus wasn't like going, oh, if I could just get to heaven, that'd be amazing. And he's like, I'm here. I've always been here. He came here because the only way to take the perfect matches with him, the imperfect matches with him, was to come and do what he did. Come and suffer as he did. It says, so while he was here, what did he do? He was that priest on earth saying, that bridge saying, God, save me from death, but don't save me alone. Let my death bring life. Let my life lived perfect the imperfect. Okay. God honors that. It says, son though he was. Isn't this interesting? In verse 8, it says, though he was the Son of God, he learned obedience. And you go, what? Like, was he disobedient? No. What he did is he learned obedience so he could teach obedience. What he did is he understood the process. He knows what it is to not, I mean, this is a mind-blowing thing for me, but Jesus didn't know how to speak Hebrew as a little Hebrew boy, right? I mean, he didn't like go, what were his first words? Hebrews chapter 5, or something like that. He didn't know. He learned things while he was here. He learned how to walk. You go like, God learned how to walk? You go, yeah, if you haven't thought through that, you haven't thought through it at the level that God wants you to, that he did literally come here as a man, as a baby, as a person. And he was subjected to being hungry. He knows what it is to be hungry. He knows what it is to be tired. He knows what it is to be frustrated and have somebody misunderstand you. He knows what it is to be betrayed. He knows what it is to give love and not receive it. He knows that very, very well. And it says, from what he suffered, and once made perfect. See, you might say again, this is where people trip over things if they don't look at it in context. Was he imperfect? No. He was perfect for the role. He was made perfect for the role of matchmaker. It says, once made perfect, complete is the other way of looking at that word. He became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. What's funny is, what was his obedience all about? What did he say? Love God, love others. I mean, it's pretty simple. Love the person next to you. Uh-oh, that's a big gap. And he says, I know, I showed you how to do it, right? I allowed myself to be punched and spit on. And I didn't punch and spit back. What I did is I said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. These guys have no idea what it's really about. I am trying to show them a depth of love they will never know apart from me. I am the perfect match, even for that hypocritical priest who's over there condemning me out of jealousy because he wants to protect the system that gives him power. But he's like, I'm even trying to reach him. I'm trying to reach past and through all of those people. And he says, he was designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Again, we'll look at it in chapter 7 in such a way that you will say, I am an expert on Melchizedek. I just know all about him now. But know as much as you need to know. Just know that he is the priest, the mystery priest that came before God set up the entirety of the Levite system. And now he's throwing the Levites out like an old pair of jeans. And he's saying, guess what? Jesus is what that was all about. The Passover lamb, that was about Jesus. It's not about innocent lambs. It's about an innocent life. It's about a blemish-free person, a person who was perfect. See, and I've used this because I've done so much relationship counsel in my life. I've asked people sometimes, okay, you're looking for the perfect person. Do you think the perfect person's looking for you? What is it about you that's making a godly girl interested in you? I've said that to some guys, and I said not to bum you out, but just honestly, if God is the great matchmaker in the sky or something like that, and you say and he's got this tremendous human being, and it looks over at you and says, "What a perfect match!" Would he do that? Are you that person? What are you bringing to the table? Are you bringing dishonesty to the table and looking for an honest person? Are you bringing disloyalty to the table and you're looking for a loyal person? I mean, how is it that person would be looking for what you're bringing? And so when I think about what he's saying here, he's saying that God, the great and most amazing thing about God is that he experienced earth's worst. And he was made perfect for this role of who he is as a gap filler by bringing us heaven's best to earth's worst. I mean, think about that. Did he not? Did he not treat Judas with the same joy and encouragement as he did the others? Because they didn't identify Judas as the traitor. They didn't all go it's him. It's the guy you've been mean to this whole time. It's the guy you never invited to the party. No, it's not. It's the guy who you cleaned his feet with the wire brush the night you didn't. No, it wasn't that. It was such a mystery to them that they were shocked too, because they said but Jesus always treated that person like the perfect disciple, the perfect follower, the perfect friend. And he's like, yeah, he did. And I think about this and I go wow, he is made perfect in that. Because it's one thing to say God is perfect, but for God to come here and give me examples of what it looks like when he does it, think of how different that is, right? This is an experiential knowledge. God has experiential knowledge of betrayal. He doesn't just say, hey, when someone betrays you, you need to forgive them. You go, what would that feel like? I have no idea. I'm up here in heaven. He has every idea. And the thing is, we might say, well, he was perfect, so it's different. He's sinless, so it doesn't hurt. Listen, it hurts more. Do you realize that if I have no fashion sense and I see plaids and stripes, it doesn't bother me as much as it does the person who knows that's wrong? Right? It's ow, 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 please take the Crocs off. Please, they're not the orange Crocs with the paisley. No. Oh, it hurts more because they're more aware of it. A person who's colorblind or something, looks okay. And so a person who is sin blind is not as blinded by sin as Jesus was, not as blindsided by the feeling of filthy, nasty treatment from people and the sin of the world placed upon him. And so don't for a moment think that it didn't bother him because he wasn't, he didn't have sin. And so it was easier for him. I got not at all. So this is where the writer of Hebrews says this. And sometimes you got to take some tough stuff from this writer. And I do. I try to absorb it as it's meant. We have much to say about this, But it's hard to make it clear to you, Scott, because you no longer try to understand. See, it doesn't say it's hard for you to understand. It says it's hard for you to want to understand. Right? You're having trouble caring about this subject because you used to care, and I like it because it says, in fact, though by this time you ought to be teachers. What he's saying is, you've already heard this before, and you know this, and you ought to be able to pass this on to others through your life and your actions and your example. But you still need to go back to basics and have someone teach you the elementary truths of God's Word all over again. What he's saying is, by this point, you should be able to be passing on to the next generation. And again, I'm using a metaphor, so please don't even care about it. But I mean, I'm using a metaphor where you say, this pattern doesn't go with that pattern. It doesn't look good together, right? This is not a good match. Or to be able to say, like, hey, a person who you want to live for truth, and this person is a complete and utter liar and only manipulates people and doesn't care about people, that's probably not a good match, right? Like, once somebody knows these things, to just either keep them to themselves or just forget them in their everyday practical life is like, this doesn't make any sense. He says you need someone to go back and tell you these things again. You need milk, not solid food. It's talking about mother's milk. It's saying like, hey, you're like a baby. You should be a grown up. And babies, they wear what you put on them, right? I mean, you can put anything on them, and they don't know any difference. And yet, part of it is coming out, and I've had people, I remember some of these put downs, growing up, but people would say, like, did you get dressed in the dark? Or, your mama dresses you funny, or any of those kind of things. Because it was basically saying, like, you need to grow up and know how to pick things well for yourself. Is this compatible with your life? Is this compatible with a life that you want and the goals that you want to accomplish? Is this person helping you treat people the way you think people should be treated? And see, the whole thing is, again, while I say God's the perfect match for you and for me, He doesn't leave us the way He found us. And I think that's super important. God's got us covered, but He doesn't just cover us up and say, stay ugly. Keep treating people poorly. Jesus is like this, you're like that, but that's okay, because as long as Jesus is nice to people, you don't have to be. As long as Jesus forgave people, you don't need to. Not at all. I mean, the very purpose of this is He's saying, I got you covered. I got you covered. I'm the perfect patch. God is perfect. We're imperfect. We don't go together. I should remember that. But this is not, God doesn't just go, and that's the way it is. He came and He said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to wrap you in a moment in the robe of righteousness of Jesus. But guess what? I'd also like you to learn from His style. See, and I think about this in a very funny and practical way to me anyway. I spent this last week down in Miami, and we have a relationship with a family that goes back 11 years now, I've realized, because they sent me a picture to it. And some people would know him, some people wouldn't, but this is a basketball player for the Miami Heat, and his name is Dwayne Wade. But it's really Dwayne Wade's father, Dwayne Wade Sr., that our family most directly has a relationship with. And it goes all the way back to a very interesting thing. But what's funny about it, I spent this last week with him, and he is a stylish person. Very stylish, I mean, he just always looks fresh and what's great about him, what I love about him is he's balling on a budget, as they put it. Because that guy will find things in places that I'm like, I go, that jacket is unbelievable. And he's like, $8 at Macy's. And I'm like, $8 for that jacket? That jacket looks scum. Are you kidding? And he looks good in everything, right? And just in any picture, I'm always like, oh gosh, he looks the coolest in that picture. Well, again, over the years, people have thought we were quite an odd couple because he introduces me as his best friend. This is my best friend and Pastor Scott, and I introduced him as, hey, this is my best friend and best friend and amazing stylist and all. This is my stylist. This is now how I'm introducing him, because he taught me by watching him how to dress better and not how to be rich to do it. And what I love about it is my wife likes Scott 2.0. She keeps saying like, wow, that's nice, and things like that. And what was cool is the other day we were together as a family, and I walked into a room, and Dwayne Wade Sr. said, looking clean, looking fresh, Scott, and I think about that. He was my friend when he must have on some level been very embarrassed to stand next to me, because there were some times where I had like the worst of clothes, and I'm not talking about like embarrassed because I just a bad match, or just a strange thing. And yet he was never ashamed to be my friend, never ashamed to introduce me to anyone. And when I think about that, I go like, it's so cool. But what was it? People have asked me, what is it that knit your hearts together? You guys are an odd couple. People want to hear the story, and I say, we're a God couple. And what I mean by that is the way we met is a hilarious story, and I'll give the short version of it, but it was basically we met at a store where I didn't know who he was. I didn't know he was the father of a famous local basketball star that my son happened to look up to, and my whole family looked up to as an incredible player and an incredible person. So we were there getting something for our son, and he was there getting things signed, or framed for an auction that had to do with his son. And so he was just a generic person to us. And so we went into that store, and he asked us a couple of questions, and we were having a picture of his son's team, the Miami Heat, framed for our son to give him as a gift, right? And our son Stephen was recovering from a surgery, and so he was going through a very difficult time. He loved basketball. And so I actually, my wife and I were both just talking to this man about how much we love two things on the earth, which was Dwayne Wade and our son. It was like, oh, well, our son, he's such an awesome kid, and our family, and we're going through a tough time, but he's an incredible kid, but he just looks up to Dwayne Wade, and so that's why we're doing this, and Dwayne Wade this, and Dwayne Wade that, and Dwayne's so good, and he's such a great example for our kids, and all the rest, and just, his tenacity and recovery from injuries and everything, and just his passion for the game. And so it was my love. We talked about it later. He said it was my love and my wife's love for our family and our love for his family that made him just instantly go, I like these guys, and I'm going to reveal myself to them, right? So that's when after all this, it was like one of those reality shows, because we just gushed, on and on about the Wade family, Wade. And he said, I'm Dwayne Wade Sr. and I was like, where's the camera? Because it was one of those moments. And I think about that, and again, it was 11 years ago. And he just sent me a picture just the other day of the Bible that we gave him way back then, and the inscription that I had written on the inside of it, and the date of it. And I was like, so much has happened, but what the verse that I gave him was the last verse out of Malachi. And it says that you would turn the hearts of fathers back to their sons, and sons back to their fathers. And that has been a mission that both of us were on before we met and since we met. And it's why we still are so knit together. We're always, when we're together, dreaming about how can we find ways for people to bridge the gap between them and God, and people and each other, and especially families that have fractured over different things, and re-injecting God into that situation, and using our lives and whatever platform and whatever connection we have to anyone and to each other to do that. So I thought about it, and I thought, you know what? As odd a couple as we are, we're perfect with that. at the same time, even now, I've gotten to the point where occasionally I told him, hey, you better look out tonight because I'm going to outdress you. And, it was fun because in that process, I didn't just stay the same. I've changed so much in that process. There's been an influence. And this is what I think about growing up, growing into things. And anyone, it says here, who lives on milk, being still an infant, isn't yet acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. Again, what is easy to tell kids? Rules. Touch this, don't touch that. Yes, no. You can't do this. Why? Because I'm the dad. That is actually an infantile approach to things. That is a baby approach. That's the law. That's what the Bible says. The Old Testament was a legal system because you were being kept under a legal system till you were able, at whatever age, whatever stage, to finally dress yourself appropriately for a moment. See, and I love that about, again, thinking about Dwayne Wade Sr., because whenever I'd ask him, what should I wear to an event, he'd say, whatever makes you feel comfortable. And it's like, he didn't tell me what to wear, but over watching him wear appropriate things for moments, I was like, this guy, I'm learning from him. And I look at this and I go, just righteousness is looking to what did Jesus wear? He clothed himself in humility. And you go, so I guess pride doesn't look that good, does it? He was dependent upon his Father in heaven. He said, I do the things that please God, and sometimes that means I displease people around me. You go, gosh, that's a pretty grown-up thought. People came and said, why don't your disciples wash their hands and do all the rituals like we do? And he said, could be because you guys don't wash your hearts and minds, and that's what God's really about. And you go, ooh, wow, little baby Jesus grew up. And you think about that, and I look about growing into who he is and seeing what the perfect match is. That's what he's saying. Solid food is for the mature. There's some meatiness to some of the things I've said today. This isn't like a Bible study for, you've never seen the Bible before. This is day one. But in some way it is, because it went back to the very basic of things, which is, I'm imperfect. God is perfect. What am I going to do about that? You go, well, I guess I'll work harder. I'll hope I'm good enough. I'll try to be better than the person next to me. And you go, all of those are terrible, terribly infantile thoughts. Better than the person next to you? How about, I want to be better for the person next to me, right? Does that make any sense? How different that is? I want to be better for the one who created me and loved me in my fallen, disgusting state while I was yet an enemy of God. It says he loved me still. You go, well, I'd like to be more like that. I'd like to be like my big brother, Jesus, right? And when you think about that, they've, through constant use, trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. I think I'm using the analogy. I hope the main point doesn't get lost in it. But there are times today when I get ready in the morning and I'll come out and Lynn sees it and she's like, ooh, I really like that. This is not what I used to hear. Okay. She always loved me. She always loved me. But she didn't always love my outfits, if I could put it that way. You know what I'm saying? She didn't always like the look. And so when I think about that, I go, I want to wow her. I don't know how else to put it. I know she loves me regardless, right? And that's the whole point, that God's like, I love you regardless. But I like what you're wearing. I really like that. That looks good together. That's the perfect match. That's the perfect match. When you match humility and faith, okay, so when you match the realization that you're imperfect, but you don't just sit in condemnation of that, but you go like, Scott, you're perfect because you're so imperfect. You're the perfect person to bring grace to people because they've seen that you need it too. But you're not saying, well, I'm the pastor, I have the answers. I go, I'm the pastor, I've got the questions, but I can assure you God has the answers, right? And that makes you go like, well, I don't know, what a perfect match. What an odd couple. But what a God couple, when you match your inability with God's ability, your, mistake with God's remedy. And you go like, wow, that's amazing. Let the metaphor soak into your life and realize that most things that don't match have something that brings them together. Have you ever heard that from a designer? They'll say, well, the pants are different than the shirt, but the way you put that scarf, it brings them together, right? When you have a carpenter, which Jesus was, and you have a flooring that doesn't match the wall, and you bring a floorboard in, and you go, it ties it together. You go, don't ever pull a floorboard away. You'll see that the tile didn't go all the way up to the thing, in a house. It covers over a problem. It bridges a gap. It deals with something that otherwise wouldn't be dealt with. And that's exactly what Jesus came to do. And they said, if you throw that out, that's what Hebrews is about. It says, it's not a good match. You and God are a mismatch, and it's not going to work. You don't want to go back to your old way of dressing. You want to go to the robe of righteousness that Jesus says, I wrap that around you, and God looks at you and go, perfect. You look perfect. Lord, thank you for the realities that you can bring to our life and help us to take those things and be, like this said, by now we ought to be teachers. Not necessarily that we're sitting on a stool giving a lesson to people or sending that out with some package on it, but the idea that people are looking to us and saying, well, how do people who say they are loved by Jesus and love Jesus, how do they look? How do they treat people? What do they do? And people may never meet Jesus directly in our day, but if we are connected to you in any way, we can be even those connectors that we can look and people could say, well, I haven't met many people who are like you. I haven't met many people who treat people like you do. And you say, well, that's because I think you're the perfect match for Jesus. And you'll be amazed what the grace that has done something for your life could do for someone else. So God, I pray that you would help us to see these things and teach us anew, teach us afresh, teach us through the everyday experiences of our life, through a floorboard or a plaid shirt or a pair of Crocs. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Alrighty. There it is. There are some birthday treats in the other room, and it is Lynn's birthday coming up this Tuesday, and it's also Abby's birthday, who's not here. So I'm going to have to eat lots of treats for everybody's sake. I think it's the perfect match. Me and a cookie. Made in heaven. But anyway, keep Lynn in your mind over the week. She's such a thoughtful. I take a minute to say. Before we go, and then I'll leave you to go. But we are the perfect match. Lynn has put up with a million things, and one of the things she's put up with is she is the most thoughtful of all people that I probably have ever met in my life. And the truth is, while I have certain strong points, my thoughtfulness in preparing of things like she does for others constantly is far, far weaker than the average mere mortal. So when I think of, if I could have drawn a better man for her to marry, I would have, and I tried continually to be that person. I really do. Falling far short, but she deserves a person who would, have the skywriting plane fly by right now saying happy birthday, Lynn, and, the band come down Main Street and all that. So she deserves that guy. She got me. So I didn't do any of those things, but she knows I at least thought of them. And I suppose it's the thought that counts, right? So I will try to be and continue to be the husband that you need and deserve and all the rest. And I just say that as publicly as I possibly can over the internet. She deserves the band and the flyovers and all the rest. So I am super thankful to all the people over the years that have taught me and to be a little bit more thoughtful because she deserves more. So there you go.
Oh, thank you. Love you, honey.
Yeah, so sorry for all the ugly outfits you had to go out with me in. And thanks for seeing past all that, because love is kind of blind, but it shouldn't have to be, right? I mean, hopefully it shouldn't have to be.